We usually see floor plans as neutral. Lines on paper, rooms, walls, doors, windows. Nothing more than layouts. But those lines carry power. They decide who gets seen, who is hidden, who feels welcome, who is pushed out, who has freedom, who is controlled. Architecture is not just shapes, it's choices, and choices shape behavior. A hallway can isolate, a courtyard can connect, a gate can exclude, a window can watch. Design feels invisible, yet it governs daily life, sometimes gently, sometimes harshly. So we ask the question, can a floor plan be evil? Picture a prison built like a wheel. At the center stands a tall tower with windows looking out in every direction. Around it sits a circular ring of cells, each facing the tower. The person in the tower can look into every cell. The people in the cells can never know if they are being watched at any moment. This was Jeremy Bentham's idea in the late 18th century, and he called it the Panopticon. His goal was efficiency and order. He thought that if prisoners felt watched at all times, they would police themselves. The structure would make discipline part of the architecture, not just part of the guard's job. The Panopticon was never fully built in Bentham's lifetime, but the design became famous. It offered more than a blueprint for a prison. It showed how walls, sightlines, and windows could carry power. You did not need whips or chains if you could shape a person's sense of being observed. The simple arrangement of cells around a tower changed behavior. It turned architecture into an instrument of control. Imagine standing in one of those cells. You can see the tower, but you cannot see the guard. The window blinds or shadows might hide whether someone is there. Do you risk breaking the rules? Most people would not. The uncertainty itself becomes the guard. The tower may be empty, yet it still holds power. In this way, the design saves money and labor. Fewer guards are needed because the prisoners behave as though watched at all times. This is governance built into the floor plan. Prisons that borrowed parts of Bentham's idea sprang up in Europe and the United States. Even when they did not follow the perfect circle, many used long corridors with cells on each side and watch points at the center. The logic was the same. Create sightlines that stretch across space, and you create control. When a guard can see down a corridor with one glance, order is easier to enforce. When prisoners know that they might be in view, their choices narrow. One early lesson from these designs is that power does not always need to show itself through force. It can hide in plain view, within the layout of a building. A prison wall does not only keep people in, it shapes their sense of time and space. A narrow cell teaches silence and stillness. A watchtower teaches obedience without words. In this way, the design itself becomes a silent warden. This is what we mean when we say architecture can act as invisible governance. Consider an everyday scenario outside prisons. Picture a school built with classrooms facing a main corridor. At one end, a principal's office looks down the hall. Students know the office has a clear line of sight, even if the principal is busy. They walk more carefully. They lower their voices. The design itself encourages discipline, much like the Panopticon. The same principle can apply in offices or hospitals, where central stations oversee many rooms. The structure creates the feeling of being observed and shapes how people behave. Some critics point out that Bentham saw his Panopticon as a humane improvement. Instead of physical punishment, he wanted architecture to prevent misbehavior before it happened. But this idea holds a darker side. If a person cannot escape the gaze, real or imagined, then their freedom is cut. They may behave, but at the cost of constant pressure. The walls and tower do not need to shout. They whisper silently that someone is always near. Over time, this kind of control becomes internal. Prisoners or students may carry it with them even outside the building. Modern examples show how this legacy lives on. Many prisons still rely on wide sightlines and central control towers. Security cameras have extended the Panopticon idea further. Instead of a single tower, small black domes in ceilings or corners hide cameras that may or may not be active. People walking through a store or an airport act as though every camera is on, because they cannot know otherwise. Again, architecture and technology merged to govern without direct orders. The Panopticon also shaped how thinkers saw society. Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, wrote about it in the 20th century. He argued that the Panopticon was more than a prison design. It was a model of how modern power works. Less through brute force, more through careful observation and the sense of being watched. Offices, schools, and even cities could follow the same logic. The result is a culture where people manage themselves because they assume they are visible. Whether or not someone is actually watching becomes less important than the feeling that someone could be. Let's return to the prison cell for a moment. The person inside may sit quietly, not because a guard is there, but because the tower is always present. The tower becomes a mental presence, not just a physical one. That presence is what makes the floor plan so powerful. The layout itself trains the body and the mind. The prisoner knows they are contained, not only by walls, but by sightlines. This shows how design can blur the line between space and authority. Bentham's Panopticon reveals that architecture is never neutral. It shapes action, it teaches habits, and it directs choices. When people talk about a floor plan being ethical or even harmful, this is one of the starting points. A simple design for efficiency may carry consequences far beyond its walls. It may not swing a baton, but it can change lives all the same. This was Bentham's bold experiment. He wanted to replace violence with vision, chaos with order. He believed a floor plan could reform behavior. What he may not have expected was how deeply his idea would influence not only prisons, but many other kinds of spaces. The Panopticon still lingers today whenever a camera lens blinks, whenever a hallway stretches under an office light, and whenever a person acts as if seen when no one is there. It is the story of power written into walls and corridors. It is also the beginning of understanding how a floor plan can reach beyond function into the realm of human behavior. Walk into a corporate office and you will see that space speaks louder than any sign on the wall. The layout tells you who holds power, who is being watched, and who belongs where. For most of the 20th century, the corner office stood as a symbol of authority. Executives occupied the edges of buildings, where glass walls provided broad views and privacy. From those positions, they enjoyed quiet and distance from the noise of staff. The choice of these offices was not random. The building's frame itself elevated status, separating the few from the many. Contrast that with the cubicle, introduced as a supposed democratizing move. In the 1960s, designer Robert Probst imagined it as a flexible system to give workers autonomy and reduce monotony. But in practice, companies shrank the dimensions, packed them into rows, and built grids of beige partitions. Instead of freedom, workers found themselves boxed in, cut off from light and air, while managers still occupied private rooms along the edges. The cubicle became a tool of standardization. Its modular walls did not liberate, they contained. Later came the open-plan office, often presented as a solution to rigid hierarchies. The idea was to foster collaboration by tearing down partitions. Rows of desks replaced cubicles, with supervisors sitting nearby. At first glance, it looked egalitarian. But the absence of barriers created new forms of control. With no walls, everyone could see and be seen. Noise spread without limit. Employees lost the sense of privacy, and managers gained a clearer line of sight into how people spent their time. This shift mirrored the logic of the Panopticon, where visibility itself became a form of pressure. To understand why these layouts matter, we need to look back at time and motion studies in the early 20th century. Engineers like Frederick Winslow Taylor used stopwatches to break down tasks into measurable units. Factories reorganized floor space to minimize wasted motion. The desk, the file cabinet, even the path to the restroom, all became part of a system designed to raise productivity. Though the studies began on factory floors, the same logic crept into offices. Supervisors arranged seating to maximize efficiency, but also to observe. Floor plans became silent instruments of discipline, shaping how long people stayed at their desks and how often they spoke to one another. In the digital age, monitoring expanded beyond sightlines. Open offices allowed managers to walk through and glance at screens, but software added another layer. Programs track keystrokes, log time on applications, and generate reports. Some companies use sensors to record how often employees move or how much they talk. The physical layout still matters because it sets the stage for these tools. Open desks make surveillance easier, while private offices create friction against it. The interplay between architecture and digital monitoring reveals how space remains central to authority. Consider a case study. A financial firm adopts an open-plan design across 2 floors. Employees sit at long tables with no partitions. Managers join the same tables but with slightly larger screens. Cameras in the ceiling track entrances and exits. Staff report that they feel pressure to appear busy because they are always visible. Conversations are muted to avoid drawing attention. Collaboration, the stated goal, becomes strained. People send more emails rather than speak face-to-face to avoid interrupting others in the crowded space. The floor plan, though meant to flatten hierarchy, ends up reinforcing a new form of control, where visibility disciplines behavior. Now compare that to a law firm that holds on to the traditional model. Partners occupy large corner offices with private seating and shelves of books. Associates line the interior offices, each with a door but smaller space. Support staff sit in a cluster of cubicles near the entrance. The hierarchy is visible in the architecture itself. A visitor walking through can read the status map without being told. Junior staff must pass through shared zones to reach their supervisors. Privacy exists, but only at the top levels. Authority is not only enforced through titles, but also through walls, windows, and square footage. These 2 examples show the trade-offs. The open-plan office strips away barriers, yet replaces them with constant watchfulness. The hierarchical office shields senior staff, while exposing junior workers to layered supervision. Both designs encode authority into physical form. Neither is neutral. The structure of walls, partitions, and desk arrangements directs how people move, how they speak, and how they perceive their place in the organization. It is easy to think of these spaces as mere backdrops to work. Yet they operate as active participants. A corner office signals success without words. A cubicle grid imposes conformity by its geometry. An open plan suggests equality, but masks surveillance. Each design tells a story about what the organization values: control, status, or efficiency. Employees absorb these messages daily, often without conscious thought. Consider the small details. In many offices, break rooms are located away from main work areas. To get a cup of coffee, employees must cross the open floor, visible to supervisors. The placement of a pantry thus discourages long breaks. In others, conference rooms have glass walls. Even when doors close, those inside are exposed to view. This creates pressure to stay on topic and to signal productivity. Such choices, though subtle, shape behavior as strongly as any policy memo. The history of office design reflects a tension between autonomy and oversight. The cubicle promised privacy but became cramped. The open plan promised collaboration but fostered noise and surveillance. Hierarchical layouts promised order but reinforced status gaps. Each model reflects an attempt to balance authority with productivity. Yet in every case, the floor plan itself carries ethical weight. It encodes assumptions about trust, freedom, and control. As work continues to shift, offices experiment with hybrid designs. Some companies mix open spaces with private pods, offering choice. Others install quiet zones and shared lounges to soften the grid. Even so, the underlying question remains: who controls the view? And who is being watched? Authority still lives in the geometry of the room. The lesson is clear: space is never neutral. It whispers messages about power with every line on the plan. When we think about a floor plan, we often imagine walls, doors, and rooms. But for many people, those same features determine whether a space is usable at all. Accessibility is not a luxury. It is the baseline requirement for participation. Yet history shows how often this basic need is ignored. A missing ramp, a confusing sign, or a loud echo in a hall can turn a public space into a barrier. The absence of thought in design can shut people out as effectively as a locked door. Consider something as simple as a ramp. For wheelchair users, ramps are not optional. They are the path in. Yet many public buildings still place ramps at side entrances, hidden away, while the main doors remain reached only by stairs. The message is subtle but powerful. Some people belong through the front, others through the back. When design creates that kind of divide, it carries ethical weight. The floor plan, through its arrangement of entry points, sets a hierarchy of dignity. Signage offers another example. For people with limited vision or cognitive differences, a sign must be clear, readable, and positioned at eye level. Yet many public buildings bury important information in clusters of small text or mount signs so high that they are missed. Transport hubs, like subway stations, often rely on complex symbols or color-coded systems that are not intuitive. The floor plan may flow beautifully on paper, but if a passenger cannot find the right platform, the space has failed its ethical duty to guide. Sound is also part of accessibility. In large atriums, airports, or train stations, designers often prize open ceilings and hard surfaces for visual effect. But these choices create harsh echoes. For someone with hearing aids or sensory sensitivity, announcements blur into noise. Instructions about delays or emergencies become impossible to understand. The acoustics, though invisible in the floor plan, are embedded in the design. When ignored, they create exclusion. The ethics of exclusion become clear when we imagine who is left out. Think about a parent with a stroller trying to navigate a subway system with only stairs. The design choice that saved money on elevators shuts out not only people with disabilities, but also families. Think about an older person with limited mobility facing a long corridor with no benches. The layout denies them a place to rest. In both cases, the floor plan silently declares who the space is for: the young, the able-bodied, the fast. Public housing provides a stark case study. In many mid-20th century projects, accessibility was an afterthought. Designers focused on maximizing the number of units within a budget. Ramps and elevators were sparse. Hallways were narrow, making it impossible for wheelchairs to turn. Signage was minimal, relying on uniform numbers in long corridors. For residents with disabilities, these buildings were hostile. They restricted mobility inside one's own home. The lack of thoughtful design forced people to depend on others for basic movement. The floor plan became a daily barrier to independence. Transport hubs show similar failures. In some older subway systems, elevators exist, but are often broken or placed far from main entrances. A rider using a wheelchair may need to travel several blocks to find a working, accessible entrance. Inside, wayfinding signs may not clearly indicate which stations are step-free. For those who are deaf, announcements about service changes rely on sound without visual backup. The result is not accidental inconvenience, but systematic exclusion. The space, by design, favors some and abandons others. When we study these failures, we see that exclusion often comes not from deliberate malice, but from neglect. Yet neglect itself has ethical implications. If an architect knows that stairs without a ramp exclude, or if planners know that signs without braille exclude, then failure to act is not neutral. It encodes inequality into the blueprint. The space itself becomes a map of who is valued. Let us imagine a scenario. A new library is built in a city center. On the glossy renderings, the design highlights sweeping staircases leading up to glass doors. The architect praises the openness of the design, but the only ramp is placed around the side, hidden by a loading dock. Inside, the open atrium amplifies sound, making it hard for anyone with hearing challenges to follow programs. Signs point in 3 directions at once, relying on small print and colors not friendly to those with visual impairments. For many, this library becomes less a place of welcome than a place of struggle. What was meant as civic pride becomes in practice a reminder of exclusion. This library exists in many forms. We see it in schools where classrooms have steps but no lifts, so children with disabilities learn in isolation. We see it in airports where the walk to gate spans half a mile with no resting points. We see it in housing projects where bathrooms are too small to allow wheelchair users to turn. These are not minor oversights. They shape lives. They can determine whether a person can go to school, hold a job, or live independently. The lesson is that accessibility is not simply a matter of code compliance. It is an ethical stance. A floor plan that ignores ramps, signage, and acoustics does more than inconvenience. It excludes. It says through design that some bodies and minds matter more than others. That exclusion is powerful because it is silent, built into the walls themselves. Unlike policy, which can change with words, architecture endures. The walls remain long after intent is forgotten, shaping who enters and who stays out. When we examine the basics, ramps, signs, and sound, we see how easily a floor plan can become a tool of inequality. These features may appear small on a blueprint, but they carry the weight of justice. They decide whether space is shared or divided, whether it includes or rejects. By neglecting them, a designer leaves people out, often the very people most in need of public space. This is the hidden power of architecture. It can welcome or it can exclude, and the choice is written in the plan itself. Deliberate exclusion in architecture shows itself in ways that are both subtle and obvious. Sometimes, a floor plan or structure is designed to keep certain groups out or to make their presence uncomfortable. Unlike simple oversight, deliberate exclusion uses design as a tool of control. It's not only about who gets in, but also about how long they stay, how they move, and whether they feel welcome. When we study these choices, the ethical stakes become sharper, because the harm is not from forgetfulness, but from intent. Take the example of gated communities. These neighborhoods are built with walls, private security, and restricted entrances. The layout is not only about protecting property, but also about limiting who can enter. Streets that might otherwise connect neighborhoods are closed off, leaving outsiders to circle around long barriers. Parks, pools, and shared spaces are restricted to residents only. On a floor plan, this looks like efficient zoning. In practice, it's exclusion. The design says that some people, often defined by wealth or class, belong inside, while others remain outside. This architecture of division reinforces social inequality by embedding it in physical space. Hostile architecture makes exclusion even more visible. We see it in metal spikes placed on flat surfaces where unhoused people might sleep. We see it in benches divided by armrests that prevent lying down. We see it in tilted bus stop seats that make resting impossible. These choices appear small, but they signal something profound. Certain people are not wanted. A floor plan of a plaza may highlight open space for public use, but when the actual surfaces are hostile to rest, the space tells unhoused people they have no place there. The ethics of such design go beyond comfort. They question whether public space truly belongs to all. Robert Moses, the mid-20th century planner in New York, offers a striking case of deliberate exclusion on a large scale. He designed parkways and bridges with low clearances that prevented buses from passing under. On paper, the decision could be justified as an engineering choice. In reality, it limited access to public beaches and parks for those who relied on buses, often working class and minority communities. Cars could pass, but buses could not. The design became a physical barrier to leisure for entire populations. The bridge heights, fixed in steel and stone, made inequality permanent. This is one of the clearest examples of how infrastructure, through design, encoded social division. The ethical stakes here differ from negligence. When a building lacks a ramp because no one thought about it, the harm is still real, but the intent is absent. When a bridge is built to block buses or a bench is designed to prevent rest, the exclusion is intentional. The designer knows who is being kept out. This raises difficult questions. Can architects claim neutrality when their work enforces exclusion? Can planners hide behind technical reasoning when the social consequences are so clear? Imagine walking through a city park. The map shows open lawns, fountains, and pathways for all to enjoy. But along the benches, you notice sharp spikes on the edges. The walls beneath bridges have angled ridges. The fountain edges are narrow and sloped, so no one can sit. The plan claims openness, but the design choices whisper rejection. People who might need to rest, linger, or sleep are excluded without a word. The floor plan itself has become a gatekeeper, silent but firm. Deliberate exclusion also shows in how neighborhoods are connected or disconnected. Gated communities may cut off direct roads, forcing traffic from poorer areas to circle wide detours. Shopping centers may design entrances only from parking lots, making it hard for pedestrians or bus riders to enter. Even small-scale details matter. A playground placed deep within a private courtyard means only residents' children play, while nearby kids are left watching through fences. Every wall, every locked gate, every diverted path carries meaning. Some argue that safety and maintenance justify such choices. Gated communities, for example, are often marketed as secure, yet the security is selective. It protects some while excluding others. Hostile architecture is defended as crime prevention or property maintenance, yet the cost is borne by those who already have little. Bridges like those of Robert Moses were framed as technical needs, yet their dimensions matched social divides of the time. The technical mask hides the ethical face. The danger of deliberate exclusion is that it normalizes inequality. Once walls are built, gates installed, and benches spiked, they become part of the urban landscape. Future generations may not see them as choices but as facts. The floor plan, frozen in lines and measurements, outlives its context. What began as a choice to exclude becomes the inherited environment. Those excluded live with the consequences long after the intent is forgotten. Let us picture another scenario. A new shopping mall opens in a city. The renderings show wide corridors, bright skylights, and open plazas, but the entrances are placed only along the parking lot. There are no sidewalks leading from nearby housing. For those without cars, entry requires crossing busy roads or walking through unpaved land. Once inside, benches are divided, fountains are rimmed with barriers, and every corner is patrolled. The plan claims to welcome the public, but the design makes it clear. The welcome is conditional. If you arrive in a car, shop quickly, and move along, you belong. If you come on foot, linger, or rest, you are out of place. The exclusion is not stated but felt. When we compare negligence with deliberate exclusion, the difference is moral clarity. Negligence harms through absence of thought. Deliberate exclusion harms through intent. Both outcomes matter, but the latter carries a sharper ethical burden. Architects and planners who design to keep people out are not neutral technicians. They are participants in shaping social life. Their drawings decide who gathers, who rests, who moves, and who is denied. In that sense, a floor plan can cross from neglect into active harm, becoming a tool not just of oversight, but of exclusion itself. Behavioral psychology plays a quiet but powerful role in spatial design. Architects and planners know that people do not move through buildings as free agents. Instead, they respond to cues embedded in the environment. These cues may be subtle, light, sound, orientation, or structural, like the placement of exits and entrances. Together, they shape choices, often without the person being aware of it. This is the essence of a behavioral nudge, a small, deliberate design feature that guides action while giving the appearance of free will. Casinos provide one of the clearest examples of this principle. Their entire layout is built to influence how long people stay, how they move, and how much money they spend. Unlike most public buildings, casinos are designed not for comfort, beauty, or efficiency, but for control of behavior. In Las Vegas, this logic reaches its peak. Casino floor plans erase time, suspend outside reality, and guide people deeper into the gaming space. Every corridor, every light fixture, every carpet pattern is calculated to keep patrons inside and engaged. Consider the absence of clocks. In daily life, clocks punctuate our routines. We check the hour to know when to eat, when to leave, when to rest. In casinos, clocks are absent. Without this anchor, time becomes fluid. A player may sit at a slot machine for hours without realizing it. The natural cues of the day are also stripped away. Windows are rare, and when they exist, they are hidden or tinted. Morning and night are indistinguishable. By removing clocks and windows, casinos achieve what might be called time erasure. Patrons cannot orient themselves, so they surrender to the rhythm of the games. The layout itself adds to the disorientation. Corridors rarely run straight. Instead, they curve and loop. Slot machines and gaming tables are arranged in clusters, forming small islands within a larger maze. Exits are hidden or distant, so finding a way out requires effort. This is not accidental. Research shows that people wandering in such spaces are more likely to pass by additional machines, see flashing lights, or hear the sound of jackpots. Each cue tempts them to stop and play again. The floor plan keeps them circulating, and circulation feeds spending. Lighting and sound also play roles. Casinos favor soft, warm light that creates a sense of comfort. The glow is constant, with no variation to signal time passing. Meanwhile, the ambient noise is carefully tuned. The clatter of coins, the ding of machines, the cheer of a winner, all are amplified. Losses are quiet. The effect is a soundscape that suggests constant success, even if most players are losing. By managing sensory input, the design sustains hope and excitement, encouraging people to stay. The case of Las Vegas illustrates this logic in action. Take a large casino on the Strip. A patron enters through grand doors into a brightly lit atrium. Ahead, the path seems open, but within steps, it bends into a cluster of slot machines. There is no direct line to the main gaming hall. Instead, the visitor is drawn through a series of small spaces, each filled with machines and tables. Along the way, food courts and shops appear, but always tucked within the maze, so reaching them requires walking past more games. Restrooms are not near entrances, but deep inside, ensuring that even basic needs push patrons further into the space. One famous designer, Bill Friedman, studied player psychology and argued that casinos should feel like gambling dens, with low ceilings, narrow pathways, and constant sensory stimulation. His designs influenced decades of casinos, where every turn revealed another machine. Later, other designers introduced the playground model, with higher ceilings, themed decor, and brighter light. But both models shared the same goal: keep people playing. Whether through comfort or confinement, the floor plan manipulates behavior. Imagine a person who enters a casino at noon, intending to stay an hour. Without clocks or windows, time drifts. The winding paths delay their exit. The sound of coins clinking gives the impression that others are winning. They stop to try again. Drinks are delivered directly to their seat, so they need not get up. When hunger arises, the nearest restaurant lies past more machines. By the time they leave, it may be midnight, though they feel only a vague sense of hours past. The floor plan has worked as an invisible hand, nudging each small choice. Ethically, this design raises sharp questions. A building that encourages relaxation or community may nudge people toward healthier outcomes. A casino, however, nudges toward excess spending, sometimes to the point of ruin. The line between persuasion and exploitation is thin. Architects and managers know that most patrons will lose money, yet the design ensures that they stay longer and lose more. The floor plan itself becomes part of the gambling machine. Some defenders argue that patrons choose to enter casinos, so the design is fair. Yet choice without awareness is fragile. When time is erased, exits hidden, and perception shaped by sound and light, can the decision to stay be called free? Behavioral psychology shows that environment often overpowers intention. A casino floor plan leverages this fact to extract value from its visitors. The manipulation is not random. It rests on decades of observation, trial, and revision. Casino operators study how people move, where they pause, what catches their eye. They redesign pathways, adjust machine placement, and alter lighting to maximize engagement. Each revision refines the nudge. Over time, the floor plan becomes a living experiment in behavioral control. What looks like chance is, in fact, design. It is worth noting that the methods pioneered in casinos have spread elsewhere. Retail stores place staple goods far from entrances so shoppers pass impulse items. Airports funnel passengers through duty-free shops before boarding gates. Online platforms, too, borrow from this logic, designing digital spaces that nudge clicks and scrolls. The casino remains the most extreme case, but the principle applies broadly. Design influences behavior, often more than we admit. In this light, a Las Vegas casino is not only a building, but also a laboratory of human psychology. Its floor plan erases time, bends paths, manages light and sound, and offers comfort only in exchange for risk. Patrons believe they act freely, yet their actions follow lines drawn on paper long before they arrived. This is behavioral design in its most concentrated form, where architecture does not just host behavior, but scripts it. Retail design shows how small choices and layout can direct how people shop. Supermarkets have long mastered the art of nudging customers, often without them noticing. A classic example is the placement of milk, bread, and other essentials at the very back of the store. The logic is simple. These are items most people need on every trip. By placing them far from the entrance, the store ensures that customers walk past dozens of other products. Each aisle becomes an opportunity to tempt them into adding something unplanned. A shopper may have come only for milk, but along the way, they encounter snacks, magazines, and seasonal items. The design exploits human tendency to make impulse choices. Impulse buy placements near the checkout extend this strategy. Small, inexpensive items such as candy bars, gum, or batteries appear at eye level while people wait in line. At this moment, shoppers are captive. They cannot move forward until the cashier is ready, so they scan the shelves around them. The store uses this pause to encourage last-minute additions. These products are rarely urgent needs. Instead, they are opportunistic grabs made in seconds. The design works because it targets moments when attention is idle and self-control is weak. Shelf arrangement is another tool. Products are not randomly placed. Eye-level shelves carry items that yield the most profit, while cheaper or generic alternatives sit lower or higher. Children's eye level is used for sugary cereals or toys, ensuring that they see and beg for them. End caps, the displays at the ends of aisles, hold promotional goods because they catch attention from multiple directions. The store plan is a script, guiding what the customer notices and when. Though shoppers may feel they are making free choices, their decisions are being framed by the architecture of the store. The same logic extends to large-scale retail environments like malls. Paths curve. Escalators are positioned to draw people deeper, and anchor stores at opposite ends pull traffic across the length of the building. Food courts are often centralized, requiring visitors to cross shopping areas before eating. Even seating is scarce outside of designated zones, ensuring that people keep moving and browsing. These details reveal a consistent goal: keep customers inside longer, because more time often translates into more spending. Airports use similar tactics but with higher stakes. Modern terminals are not only transit spaces, but also major retail hubs. Duty-free shopping areas illustrate this well. In many airports, passengers cannot reach their gates without passing through these corridors. Shelves crowd the path, forcing travelers to walk past perfume counters, liquor displays, and luxury goods. It is not enough to place shops nearby. The design makes them unavoidable. A traveler may have no intention of buying, but the exposure alone increases the chance of a purchase. The airport turns the necessity of moving toward a gate into an opportunity for sales. Duty-free zones exploit time as well as space. Travelers often arrive early, leaving them with idle hours. Seating areas near gates may be limited or uncomfortable, while retail zones offer light, music, and activity. Some airports position comfortable seating inside cafes or shops rather than in open waiting areas. The design nudges passengers to spend money simply to rest. Even necessities like water or food are located past security, where prices are higher and options fewer. The airport plan leaves little room for alternatives. Consider the experience of a traveler arriving at a major international hub. After clearing security, they step directly into a brightly lit retail zone. To reach their gate, they must weave through displays. Along the way, signs point toward exclusive offers or limited-time products. Seating is scarce outside of these areas, so waiting comfortably often means buying a drink or meal. By the time boarding is called, the traveler has been exposed to dozens of prompts to spend, even if they resisted. The journey through the airport has doubled as a guided shopping tour. These examples raise questions about the line between guidance and manipulation. On one hand, design can make spaces more efficient. Placing related items near each other or ensuring that foot traffic moves smoothly serves both customers and businesses. On the other hand, design that hides exits, withholds seating, or forces exposure to products shifts from helpful guidance to manipulation. The difference lies in intent and transparency. A store that organizes products clearly helps customers. A store that hides essentials or blocks direct paths uses the floor plan against them. Ethical debates often focus on consent. Shoppers do not usually consent to being steered, nor are they fully aware of the cues shaping their choices. A note buyer might prefer to go straight to the back and leave, but the design pulls them through distractions. An airport passenger has no alternative path to avoid duty-free. In both cases, freedom of choice exists in theory but not in practice. The environment frames behavior so tightly that choices are narrowed to what the designer intended. Some argue this is acceptable because everyone benefits in some way. Stores profit, and customers gain access to goods in attractive environments. Airports use retail revenue to offset costs, keeping ticket prices lower. Yet this defense overlooks the uneven effects. People with limited income may feel pressure from constant exposure to luxury goods. Travelers with disabilities may struggle with long detours or limited seating. The ethics of nudging hinge on whose interests are prioritized. If the design serves only the operator's profit while ignoring user needs, it leans toward exploitation. It is also important to distinguish nudges that support healthy outcomes from those that promote harmful ones. A grocery store might place fruit at the front, encouraging better diets. The same logic used to push candy can push healthier options. In contrast, airports rarely use their captive design power to promote well-being. Instead, they emphasize alcohol, high-fat foods, and luxury items. The architecture of nudging is neutral, but its use can either support or undermine human flourishing. A useful way to frame this issue is through transparency. If people know how a design shapes their choices, they can resist or embrace it with awareness. Hidden nudges, like concealed exits or forced retail corridors, deny this awareness. They treat users not as agents, but as subjects to be managed. Visible nudges, like clear labels or well-marked healthy options, respect autonomy while still guiding behavior. The ethics of retail and airport design lie in whether the floor plan hides its intent or makes it plain. In the end, floor plans are not neutral. They are active tools of persuasion built into the walls, shelves, and corridors we pass through. Whether we shop for milk or wait for a flight, the space itself pushes us toward choices. Sometimes this guidance is harmless, even helpful. At other times, it crosses into manipulation that strips away awareness and freedom. The distinction depends on how openly the design operates and whose benefit it serves. The way a building is laid out can shape how people feel about themselves and one another. A space can bring people together or push them apart. A layout can foster community or it can create loneliness. The difference often lies in how hallways, shared areas, and the basic rhythm of a floor plan are designed. When residents walk down featureless corridors with no light, no places to pause, and no sense of ownership, they often feel like anonymous bodies moving through a machine. When those same residents step into spaces designed with courtyards, porches, or even modest gathering spots, they find reasons to know their neighbors. Architecture can quietly encourage connection, but it can also isolate. Public housing projects in the United States provide a stark lesson. In the mid-20th century, ambitious efforts to house low-income families resulted in massive complexes built with efficiency in mind. The goal was to provide shelter for many people at low cost. But efficiency in construction often meant repeating the same floor plan across dozens of floors, stripping individuality from the design. The most notorious example is the Pruitt-Igoe housing project in St. Louis, completed in the 1950s. It consisted of high-rise towers arranged in a uniform grid. At first, it seemed like a triumph of modern planning. But within 2 decades, the project became a symbol of failure, with the buildings eventually demolished in the 1970s. The problems of Pruitt-Igoe cannot be explained only by poverty or crime. The design itself played a major role. Residents lived in tall buildings served by long interior corridors. These corridors were narrow, windowless, and anonymous. There was no sense of personal territory or semi-private space where neighbors could casually meet. Unlike a traditional street with stoops, porches, or corner stores, these hallways offered nothing but passage. A mother walking her child to the apartment door encountered a stretch of identical doors with no clues about who lived inside. The space gave no invitation for small talk or community bonds. The design also lacked natural surveillance. Because of the sheer scale of the towers and the monotony of the corridors, residents often felt unsafe. Elevators stopped only on certain floors, requiring people to use skip-stop stairwells for other levels. These stairwells became hidden zones where crime could occur. A floor plan that saved money by reducing elevator stops ended up creating blind spots where people felt vulnerable. Over time, residents avoided common spaces, retreating behind their doors. The physical design reinforced fear and isolation. Compare this to traditional low-rise neighborhoods. A row of houses on a street has front steps where children play and adults sit. Neighbors recognize each other through small daily encounters. Even in modest or crowded conditions, these visible thresholds create opportunities for connection. The street becomes a shared space, alive with informal surveillance and social life. In Pruitt-Igoe and similar projects, the absence of such thresholds meant that shared areas belonged to no one. When spaces belong to no one, they are rarely cared for. The alienation produced by these designs extended beyond physical safety. Residents often spoke of feeling like they lived in warehouses rather than homes. The towers stripped individuality from the act of living. Identical windows in identical rows created a sense of interchangeability. Without balconies, porches, or ways to personalize the exterior, residents could not mark their presence. When a building erases identity, people struggle to see it as their own. Over time, neglect followed, both by residents and authorities. Maintenance failed, vandalism spread, and the cycle deepened. American public housing failures were not limited to Pruitt-Igoe. In Chicago, the Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor homes repeated many of the same mistakes. Towering blocks with long corridors produced similar effects: alienation, fear, and eventual decline. These projects taught a harsh lesson about the social consequences of floor plans. The idea that shelter alone is enough ignores the fact that humans crave recognition, safety, and shared identity. When design ignores those needs, it produces not only bad housing, but also fragile communities. The emotional impact of layouts becomes clearer when contrasted with smaller-scale housing initiatives that succeeded. In some mixed-income developments, designers included townhouses with front stoops, shared courtyards, and community centers. These modest design features created spaces where neighbors saw one another, exchanged greetings, and built trust. A courtyard framed by apartments allows children to play under the watch of many eyes. A stoop allows a parent to sit outside while remaining connected to the household. These details may appear small, but they add up to an environment where people feel both private and connected. The ethical lesson from these failures is straightforward. Housing design carries moral weight. A floor plan can decide whether people live in isolation or in community. A corridor without windows can create fear, while a courtyard can create friendship. These are not neutral choices. They shape how people use space, how they see each other, and how they experience daily life. When architects reduce housing to cost per unit and square footage, they risk creating spaces that harm the very people they intend to serve. The story of Pruitt-Igoe also shows how alienation can become self-reinforcing. As fear grew, residents withdrew, which left shared spaces even more empty. Empty spaces invited neglect, which encouraged crime. Once crime increased, authorities labeled the project a failure of the residents rather than of design. The demolition of the towers became a symbol of modernism's collapse, but it also stood as evidence of how floor plans can embody social policy. By saving money on details that fostered community, planners effectively wrote alienation into the walls. Imagine if the same resources had been used to build low-rise units with small yards or shared gardens. Even modest balconies would have provided a sense of ownership. Corridors with natural light and windows overlooking the outdoors could have broken the monotony. Instead, the relentless repetition of form created buildings that felt more like storage for people than homes for families. The difference between a place that welcomes life and a place that suppresses it lies in the smallest details of layout. The failures of American public housing reveal how architecture extends beyond aesthetics. The question is not only how a building looks, but how it makes people feel. A floor plan can soothe, or it can alienate. It can invite safety through visibility, or it can create fear through hidden corners. When design disregards the human need for community, it produces spaces where residents feel unwanted. The story of featureless corridors and towering blocks makes clear that architecture holds social power. The lessons remain relevant as cities continue to struggle with how to house people affordably while maintaining dignity and connection. To ask whether a floor plan can be evil is to ask whether a drawing on paper, once built into walls and doors, can take on the qualities of moral action. At first glance, it seems absurd. Evil is a word we use for people, not for buildings. Yet when we see how design can shape lives, restrict movement, and enforce suffering, the question gains weight. Architecture may not have intent in itself, but those who design and approve it often do. When intent meets physical form, the result can produce harm that is deliberate, lasting, and inescapable for those trapped within it. Evil in design can take two forms. One is deliberate harm. Here, the architect or planner knows the result will cause suffering and designs with that in mind. The other is unintended harm, where negligence or indifference leads to outcomes that oppress or exclude, even if the designer never wished it. Both raise ethical stakes, though in different degrees. The former reflects cruelty, the latter carelessness. The line between them is not always sharp. The clearest examples of deliberate harm appear in places built to dominate and destroy. Nazi concentration camps during the Second World War are among the starkest cases. They were not accidents of layout or careless choices of material. They were calculated structures of oppression. The camp at Auschwitz, for instance, was arranged to maximize control, efficiency, and dehumanization. Barbed wire, guard towers, and long rows of barracks, stripped of individuality, turned human beings into numbers. The space was designed to move prisoners through stages of confinement, labor, and in many cases, death. Rail tracks delivered people directly into the complex, while gas chambers were concealed yet integrated into the flow. Architecture in this setting became a tool of genocide. Walking through such a space, even in ruins today, makes clear how every feature reinforced power. The watchtowers ensured constant visibility. The fences cut escape routes into impossibility. The barracks forced intimacy in overcrowded, degrading conditions. The distance between barracks and work sites was measured not for comfort, but for labor extraction. The camp did not simply house people under guard. It turned space into an active instrument of oppression. Here, the word evil seems unavoidable. The harm was not only intended but carried out through precise design. Apartheid South Africa offers another case, less concentrated in violence, but equally rooted in intentional exclusion. Under apartheid, township planning forced Black South Africans into segregated areas on the periphery of cities. These townships were not random settlements, but planned zones designed to keep populations divided and unequal. The layouts made access to jobs, education, and healthcare more difficult. Roads and rail lines reinforced separation. Even the distances themselves served as barriers, ensuring that everyday life for Black residents involved long, costly commutes, while white citizens lived closer to resources. The townships also lacked many amenities. Schools, clinics, and shops were limited or absent. Houses were small and uniform, signaling both control and disregard. Public space was scarce, making collective organization harder. The geometry of the city worked to weaken community power while keeping surveillance strong. This was not neglect alone. It was a deliberate use of urban planning to enforce racial hierarchy. The architects and officials who drew those maps may not have thought of themselves as designing suffering, but they used their skills to sustain a system that relied on it. The result is a form of design that carried the weight of political evil. Comparing these two examples shows how scale and method can vary, but the ethical stakes remain high. Concentration camps imposed direct physical harm, while apartheid planning inflicted structural harm over generations. Both used architecture as a weapon. The difference lies in how explicit the violence was. In the camps, the violence was immediate and lethal. In the townships, it was slower, woven into daily obstacles and cumulative disadvantage. Yet both reveal that floor plans, street grids, and layouts are not neutral. They can serve systems of domination as surely as weapons can. Unintended harm complicates the picture. Consider a poorly designed housing block built with little thought to resident needs. Corridors may be dark, stairwells unsafe, and courtyards barren. The result can be alienation, crime, and despair. The designers may never have intended this. They may have sought efficiency, cost savings, or modern style. Yet the built environment still harms those who live within it. The question then becomes whether negligence crosses into ethical failure. When evidence accumulates that certain designs cause predictable harm, choosing them again starts to look less like innocence and more like disregard. Responsibility sits at the center of this debate. Is architects and planners know their work shapes human life? Can they claim neutrality? To say a building is just a design ignores the power of form to guide movement, restrict choices, and influence behavior. A locked gate, a hidden entrance, or a distant school is never just a line on paper. It is an act that plays out in lived experience. Responsibility means acknowledging that design carries moral weight even when decisions feel technical. Intent sharpens this responsibility further. When harm is deliberate, as in camps or apartheid cities, responsibility is clear. The architect or planner becomes complicit in oppression. When harm is unintended but foreseeable, responsibility still matters, though in a different degree. Ethical design requires not only skill, but also foresight. It demands asking who benefits, who suffers, and what hidden costs will this layout impose. Ignoring such questions does not erase harm. It only shields those with power from accountability. To speak of evil in design is therefore not metaphor alone. It is a recognition that the structures we build can amplify human cruelty or indifference in ways that outlast individuals. A concentration camp may stand for only a few years, but its ruins remind us how space itself can be turned against life. A segregated township may evolve over decades, but its street grid can carry inequality forward long after laws change. In both, the floor plan is more than geometry. It is a moral instrument, wielded with intent or without care, but always with consequence. Some insist that floor plans cannot be evil because they are only drawings. A sheet of paper with lines cannot bear moral weight. By this view, What matters is how people use space, not the geometry itself. If a prison is cruel, it is the guards and laws, not the walls. If a city segregates, it is politics, not concrete. This position treats design as neutral, a tool like any other. It suggests that the word evil is too heavy, better reserved for deliberate human choices rather than silent arrangements of walls and corridors. But this view underestimates how design shapes human behavior. A hallway without windows is not only a feature, it is an environment that creates isolation. A fence across a path is not only a barrier, it is a decision that denies passage. Space influences action, whether we admit it or not. To call design neutral ignores the fact that form directs movement, access, and possibility. Even when architects claim neutrality, their choices impose rules on those who inhabit the space. Neutrality itself becomes a kind of illusion, shielding decision-makers from responsibility. Others argue that evil is too blunt a term, that it exaggerates what are often technical compromises. Consider the trade-off between efficiency and inclusion. A hospital may place operating rooms deep within the building to keep them sterile and secure. This makes sense medically, but it can create long, confusing paths for visitors or patients. Is that evil? Most would say no. It reflects practical needs, not malice. The problem arises when efficiency becomes the sole priority and inclusion is dismissed as unimportant. A design may begin as a technical decision but evolve into a form of exclusion if no care is taken to balance competing needs. This balance shows how design always involves ethical judgment. Every choice weighs one set of interests against another. Building codes require ramps and accessible toilets because without them, efficiency would often trump inclusion. The law itself acknowledges that technical design has moral implications. Architects and planners cannot act as if they are free from ethics simply because they deal with walls and layouts. They may not choose who lives in a building, but they shape how those lives unfold. Reframing design as moral practice brings the stakes into focus. Architects often speak of function and beauty, but ethics must sit alongside these. To design a school is not only to arrange classrooms, but also to decide how children interact, whether they feel safe, and whether every student can participate equally. To design a neighborhood is not only to plot roads, but also to shape who meets whom, who feels welcome, and who gets excluded. Ethics in design is not an abstract debate, but a practical question of whose lives will be made easier, harder, safer, or riskier by the choices of a few professionals. Some guidelines for ethical design are already visible. Accessibility codes, environmental standards, and community consultation processes push architects to think beyond cost and aesthetics. But more is needed. Transparency about the goals of a project, foresight about long-term effects, and humility about unintended harm should be core practices. Designers should ask not only whether a building works, but also whether it treats its users with dignity. They should also ask who those users are, including groups often overlooked, people with disabilities, migrants, children, the elderly. Ethics requires seeing the invisible and giving form to their needs. Future challenges will make these questions even sharper. Smart buildings now use sensors to track movement, adjust lighting, and control access. These technologies promise efficiency, but also expand surveillance. Who owns the data gathered in a workplace lobby or a smart apartment? Who can be excluded at the push of a button? As artificial intelligence designs layouts or manages flows of people, responsibility may seem to drift away from human hands. Yet the ethical stakes remain. If anything, they grow larger, because decisions made by algorithms may be harder to question and resist. A floor plan generated by AI may appear neutral, but its logic may reflect biases coded into the system. Cities themselves are becoming sites of surveillance, with cameras, checkpoints, and predictive policing embedded into streets. Here again, design is not innocent. The placement of cameras, the narrowing of streets, the arrangement of public squares, all these shape not only safety, but also freedom. A city planned with constant monitoring may reduce crime, but at the cost of privacy and trust. The ethics of urban design will need to grapple with the line between guiding behavior and controlling it. The same tools that make a plaza feel welcoming can also make a protest impossible. The idea that a floor plan can be evil may still sound provocative, but it captures a truth. Space is never neutral. It reflects decisions, and those decisions carry moral weight. Some harms are deliberate, others unintended, but both leave marks on lives. The difference between a school where children thrive and one where they feel trapped may rest in the layout of classrooms and corridors. The difference between a neighborhood that fosters community and one that enforces segregation may rest in the placement of roads and fences. When we call a design evil, we do not mean the paper is cursed. We mean that human choices, expressed through geometry and material, have been turned toward harm. To deny this is to excuse neglect and absolve power. To acknowledge it is to place responsibility where it belongs, on those who shape the spaces we live in. The challenge for the future is not only to avoid harm, but to embrace design as an ethical act in itself.